This material is made available to you by or on behalf of the University of Melbourne under Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. It may be subject to copyright. For more information, visit the University Copyright website.
Well, hello everybody. So welcome to everybody watching in Managing for Value Creation. And I'd like to welcome our two guests from Zoos Victoria who have very, very kindly agreed to give us some insights in the sorts of things that this quite unique organisation measures in terms of its performance. So the session that this case study relates to is all about looking at the performance of organisations in creating value and understanding what different challenges there are in measurement. And so I'd like to introduce our two guests. First of all, Brendan Dodd, who is the General Manager for Marketing for Zoos Victoria. Welcome, Brendan. And Mel Wyatt, who, as well as being a personal friend, has also been very, very helpful in past years in setting the scene for this case study as part of a role as a Senior Manager for Education for Zoos Victoria. And as you can see, Mel is walking her way through the wilds of the zoo. You can see that fantastic background. So I might pass over to Brendan and Mel, who have a slide presentation, and I might just ask a few tricky questions as we go along to keep them on their toes. So Brendan and Mel, over to you guys.
Thanks, Michael. Just take over the screen.
It's freezing cold outside, so we've got cups of tea and biscuits ready.
Great. So just today we're going to chat through value at Zoos Victoria, which for us is very much more than just the bottom line and just our revenue. Like all businesses, we need to make enough money to cover our expenses and be a viable financial entity. And the expense of running 4 zoos, which we have in our network, is really significant. So it's a big challenge for us. However, we're a not-for-profit and we're an extremely purpose-led organisation. So value for us is often less tangible and it's not very easy to measure in a lot of cases. So today I thought I'd share a brief history of zoos. To understand our model, it's really helpful to understand a bit about the history of zoos and also our current purpose at Zoos Victoria, which has evolved from that history. I'll share about our value creation challenge, the value creation approach that we have at Zoos Victoria, some of the key metrics that we have, and then our focus on high value audiences. And we use education as an example, so Mel will talk through that. So a brief history of zoos. So let me indulge a little bit here. Zoos are a polarizing topic. For many people, there's a bit of an icky feeling when they think about zoos, and rightly so. Zoos actually have quite a checkered history. It's a really mixed bag of questionable policies, ethics, and need. And our network, we've been through that as well, and we like to think we've evolved and come through that to be a very worthy and purpose-driven organisation. Zoos are strongly linked with colonial history. There was a period of time where they were a symbol of royal power. So animals brought in from around the world, displayed as natural curiosities, wonders from the frontiers of the world. And there was very limited concern for animal welfare, beyond keeping it alive enough to show it off and make some money from the animal. In those days, there was a view you could always send for more from the wild. Overall, it was a pretty nasty era, and you can see the sort of paintings of that sort of zoo era there. Not much space for animals and very much a novelty. The next era of zoos are almost worse. So zoological societies, even in Australia, were largely groups of wealthy citizens, and they had a priority of introducing animal species, so bringing animal species into their environment. In some cases, that was to replicate the environment they grew up with, so some familiar colonial charm from home, or in many cases, it was an opportunity to hunt familiar game. So you can see even in the pictures we've got here, a bit of a view of what zoos might have been like back in this era. And then the tally here is from the museum, which was tracking birds liberated by some of the zoological societies within Australia. So many pest species came through the practice of that era, and they had a significantly detrimental impact on our local ecosystem. Original zoos were more akin to either a circus or even just a paddock, as we saw in that previous picture. But progressively, zoos started to become more structured and for the time became more modernised. However, modernised at this point was almost exclusively improving things for the visitors, not necessarily for the animals. If animals were made easier to see, you'd have pits and cages that put them right in front of visitors at all times. Animals were also trained and encouraged to act and put on show. So that included things like cycling chimps, and many zoos even had smoking primates. It was all about entertainment and making money from visitors. So over time, the role and ethics of these sort of zoos became, which compromised animal welfare, quite rightly became questioned. And we started to see through the 70s, through the 90s, there was a lot of improvement in providing more natural habitats for animals. So we started to see a bit of a focus on still providing for the visitors, seeing animals, but a lot more of those natural elements and mimicking natural behaviours were coming into exhibits. So actual trees and obviously things that would help animals replicate their behaviours. Or water, different elevations, things that would exercise animals' natural instincts. And that trend helped things continue to get better. There was a greater focus on education, on showing what animals would be like if we were able to view them in the wild. Animals became ambassadors for a lot of their wild counterparts, and the habitat started to reflect areas that they might live in the wild. So bringing people into their worlds. And some of the, a lot of planning went into those habitats and now goes into those habitats where there can be high animal welfare and also continue to deliver a high quality visitor experience. So people can feel a connection with animals and nature in a more genuine sense. So this photo on screen is from Melbourne Zoo now, which is a lemur habitat that visitors can actually walk through. They have to stay on the path while the lemurs have full reign of the place. It's very much worth checking out. We think it's an example of a modern zoo where animal welfare and visitor experience are balanced, and a big focus on making sure that animals are able to exhibit all the behaviours that they would want to be. So as the habitats improved and our ability to focus on animal welfare improved, we started creating spaces where animal welfare was prioritised. Our zoos started to also take on a greater role in supporting the needs of wildlife more broadly. It's not just the animals within the zoo, but acting as a hub for conservation action. So the purpose is shifting again from entertainment through to education and observing animals doing their natural thing to now being an advocate and an enabler of conservation action. And Zoos Victoria is one of the leaders in this space. So our organisation has become entirely geared towards conservation, particularly with our fighting extinction initiatives, which I'll talk about more. And zoos around the world, we're increasingly seeing becoming a hub for conservation as their core purpose. So these are photos on screen of our offices. So we have a commitment that no Victorian terrestrial vertebrate species will go extinct. There are 27 species that we're working hard to prevent from being the next potential species for extinction. So zoos generally have evolved in line with shifting cultural expectations. Around the world, you'll still see many that are focused on entertainment, and there are many that don't deliver environments with positive animal welfare. However, overall, there's been significant improvement. At Zoos Victoria, as we said, we're entirely committed to conservation. We're not for profit. We describe ourselves as a zoo-based conservation organisation, and that comes with a very tricky balance in terms of how we approach creating value. In terms of what we operate, we have 4 amazing zoo properties. Each of them have their own unique means of helping people engage with nature. So they've all got a bit of their own character and identity, offering different animals, landscapes and experiences, and they're all really worth checking out if you haven't seen any of them before. So Melbourne Zoo, there's wildlife from all around the world. It's right in the heart of the city in Parkville, so it should be very close to a lot of you. It highlights a lot of animals, including gorillas, giraffes, lions, meerkats, things that you wouldn't necessarily, that many visitors wouldn't have seen before. Werribee Open Range Zoo is an African-themed zoo. It's well known for a safari bus tour, which takes you through expansive plains where animals are roaming freely. So you can see hippos, rhinos, giraffes, and zebras. Healesville Sanctuary is our haven for native Australian wildlife. It's set amongst the backdrop of the Yarra Valley, and there's some highlights with native bird shows. So you can see there birds of prey showing off their flight and foraging skills, which is pretty amazing. And last October, we acquired Kyabram Fauna Park, so a real regional zoo added to our family. So it's home to many native species and also some friendly meerkats, set on huge properties, so 55 hectares with expansive wetlands. So some really unique environments for us to help people find some connection with nature And that's often what we're talking about from a marketing perspective in my department, is trying to sell this unique, fun, richly sensorial visitor experience. So that while there can be entertainment in here, we're looking at those moments that spark our visitors' natural curiosity, increase their appreciation and interest in wildlife, and their desire to act on its behalf. So we're a very much a fun experience, and that's largely what we use to connect with our audiences. An organisation that's fueled by a purpose and fighting for a cause. And for us, that cause really became clarified around one particular moment as we started this journey of getting more and more involved in conservation. And one of those experiences, and that experience relates very much to this sound, which is the sound of the Christmas Island pipistrelle. As we started this journey of getting, which were introduced by humans, So that strange sound is the sound of a little bat that's only ever been found on Christmas Island. It became threatened by an invasive species of ants, which were introduced by humans. It was a type of ant that would infiltrate their nests and kill the bats off. So in 2009, they were identified that they were being killed at a rate that was growing rapidly. So we were called in, partnering with other zoos who are, again, trying to play a greater role in conservation. And we took on the responsibility to locate these bats and begin efforts to rehabilitate their population. But by the time we were called in, it was too late. So the sound you just heard was the one male bat that we were able to locate, the very last one. So our instruments picked up the sound of its flight for 3 days. That's the sound that you just listened to, and then it stopped. So no Christmas Island pipistrelles have ever been seen or heard since. What you just listened to then was the sound of an extinction event. So for the pipistrelle, we were too late to be in a position to help, but we vowed we wouldn't be again. So that experience was a galvanizing moment for our organisation. It drove the formation of our moral purpose, which is to fight extinction and create a future rich in wildlife. And we plan our business around 4 key pillars that live up to that moral purpose. So working for wildlife, creating special places, connecting community with nature, and thriving ethical business. So I'll touch on these as we talk about what we do from a value creation perspective. So all of these ladder up to supporting a huge number of programs and initiatives that go towards our conservation efforts, from our fighting extinction through to community conservation campaigns. I'll just play a really short video that'll show some of this work and the species that we support.
We have a commitment that no Victorian frog, reptile, bird or mammal will ever go extinct on our watch to protect our amazing and unique biodiversity. You can help us achieve this because even the smallest actions in our own lives can make a huge difference when done en masse. Things like keeping your pet cat contained to protect our wildlife, blowing bubbles, not balloons, at outdoor events to protect our seabirds, and turning your lights off for the bogong moth to help the moths and the critically endangered mountain pygmy possums. Together we can fight extinction and have a much brighter future for Australia's biodiversity.
There's a huge number of programs that we're supporting related to conservation, and our power to help and provide for those programs comes to the strength of our community. So our community involves over 2.5 million visitors across our properties. We have over 355,000 members to our zoo. So they pay an annual subscription to be part of our community, where they get unlimited access to our zoos and also some special events and programs. We also have a hugely engaged audience across our online communication, so our EDMs and our social audiences as well. To put that in perspective with the membership numbers, so with 350,000 members, it's more than the 3 biggest AFL clubs put together. So if you look at Richmond, Collingwood and Carlton, we're out doing them for memberships. And also 1 in 18 Victorians are a Zoos Victoria member. So our community's huge, it's growing really quickly, and it's something that we need to continue to grow if we're going to grow the scope of our conservation work. So I've talked a bit about us and a bit about the history of zoos, but what it's really aiming to do is to set up, I guess, our value prioritisation challenge. We mentioned that we need to be a profitable business, We have these ethical boundaries within which we need to operate while we do that. And we have this value prioritizing challenge between our conservation, our moral purpose and mission, and then the commercial arm of our business, which enables that. The conservation aspect of our work is really expensive. It's really resource intensive, and it doesn't have any tangible profit or return. So there's no revenue that comes back from putting threatened species back out into the wild. And from a commercial perspective, we need to make sure that we're taking into account the animal welfare standards that we set. We need to look after our visitors, make sure we are given an experience that is appealing to them, that can deliver some entertainment or some value to them on some level. We want to continue to grow our community, but we need to be very conscious about any sort of impacts that has as we get more people involved in these sort of programs and as visitors to our zoos. So in terms of our value creation approach, so as we said, there's a number of different ways that we have to define value, whether it's the commercial sense or with our conservation outcomes. But ultimately, we want to increase the size and power of our community to grow the impact of our conservation work. And there's commercial practicalities that enable that. So our structure for value creation is based on this relationship model in a really rough sense. We have a process where we try and recruit people to engage them with our brand, engage them with Zoos Victoria, and then work to build a deeper relationship with them that unlocks more commercial and conservation value over time. Our business is structured to have departments that kind of operate within this model and bring different things to those roles. So from a marketing perspective, we're very much focused on recruitment. So marketing and publicity are often the first contact people have with our zoos. So we have a priority to go out and bring new audiences, tell them about our zoos, give them a reason to engage. And as we said, often that might be to have an entertaining day with family and friends at the zoo. We have a visitor experience strategy that takes into account the experience people have when they come to our zoos. So that's often focused on single tickets, making sure the people that are engaging with us for the first time have an opportunity to have a really positive experience. We'll put on special events to attract different audiences in. So examples, we have a wine and wildlife event at Healesville coming up in July. We have done zoo twilights in the past, which are big concerts at Melbourne Zoo, so get new audiences into our zoos. There's different experiences, which might include animal insights and encounters. We have community conservation programs on site that you can participate in, and we have a very specific experience developed around schools and teachers. From a commercial sense, we also have tourism, which focuses very heavily on recruitment, as well as retail and catering offerings. So this is where we start to focus more on growing the value of our community. So as a non-profit, not-for-profit, anything that's spent on food or retail on our properties goes straight back into supporting conservation as well. We have a loyalty and engagement strategy. So again, focused on conservation. How do we get people involved with these programs in an ongoing way? It includes memberships, which we mentioned. We have a very large membership base. We have partnerships with other businesses, and we also have a huge volunteer base. And then there's the philanthropy strategy. So philanthropy is often the real high end of community support, where we have people leaving significant value in their wills. So planned giving and endowment. We also have annual giving programs and different conservation partners and animal adoption programs within that space. So a lot of different parts of our business structured around creating value in different ways, whether it's more focused on recruitment or growing that community value over time. In terms of the key metrics and indicators, we structure this around those 4 pillars of the business that I referenced before. So being a thriving ethical business, creating special places, connecting community with nature, and working for wildlife. Some of the indicators for a thriving ethical business include our revenue and profit. So you'll see these reported within our annual reports, which we'll touch on soon. The public sentiment towards Zoos Victoria, so making sure that we are living up to our ethical claims and our animal welfare perspective. And our staff welfare as well also fits under thriving ethical business. Creating special places, we lean very heavily on visitor feedback as an indicator. We talk about property perceptions, which we track through external research. We have Net Promoter Score as another indicator in that space. And then visitation, consideration, and intention. So how likely people are to want to come to these places, how much do they perceive them as being special places that add value to them. Connecting community with nature is often about the number of people that we get through our zoo, so our visitation volume. It's about conservation campaign awareness and also the actions people are taking on our specific community conservation campaigns, as well as public sentiment, which we track at a macro level. So how people feel about particular topics that relate to our zoos, so or relate to the functions that our zoos provide. So it might be their awareness of plastic as an impact on the environment, or awareness of climate change. There can be more broad factors than specifically what they feel about Zoos Victoria. And then membership engagement's another really strong indicator for how we're connecting community with nature. Working for wildlife, we're focusing on conservation programs implemented and then the outcomes of those programs. So there's some headlines, I guess, as far as our indicators and metrics. And I guess the importance of those varies to different teams within the business, but all of these are laddering up towards our moral purpose. So if we're achieving these, then we are working towards that future rich in wildlife.
Brendan, it's a really good example of a really complex organisation with some metrics that are almost in opposition. You have some things that you have some really challenging programs that you're running. You may be about to talk about this, but I'm quite interested in measurements that you may look at in terms of changing public sentiment on the role of zoos as an agent of conservation and environmental change.
Yeah, absolutely. So we use an external research agency to track and they monitor the perceptions of Victorians. So we have a substantial sample that goes into that survey. So it's a quantitative survey and we track key perceptions related to Zoos Victoria and then also socially responsible topics that might include some of those environmental topics as well. So the ones that we track for Zoos Victoria, I've included, I think, further in here, but they relate to, are we perceived to be a group that supports wildlife and lives up to a lot of the things that we value? And we have some very high targets and benchmarks around that. And then we track public interest in topics that might be more headwinds, I guess, as far as impact on our business and setting the challenge for, how much work is it going to take for us to drive interest, to drive action and engagement on particular topics. So yeah, I do have a few examples in here. Hopefully I can share that example. So some of the ways that you will see these indicators and topics used. One of them is in our annual reports. So we publish our annual reports. You can go online and see them. And within Thriving Ethical Business, you'll see our revenue, expenditure, all of our operating costs, the number of members that we have, what we are bringing in from philanthropy. So all of these things are publicly available online, and they're really strong measures for us as being a thriving ethical business. For creating special places, so we mentioned we do an external survey, and one of the key things that we track is our Net Promoter Score. So we look at people who have visited each of our properties in the last 2 years and whether they're more likely to recommend us than not, essentially. I'm sure you guys deal with NPS. We perform pretty strongly in this space. For us, it's usually there's a small cohort which we are educating on the role of zoos and trying to stand out differently. We have some passives, and that's where we are focused on our visitor experience strategy to try and improve that experience on the day. And hopefully we're creating lots of promoters in this space. Tracking special places as well. We track the consideration to visit, and we track that relative to other attractions. So Zoos Victoria, obviously there's only so many zoos in Victoria, so our competition we see as being largely other cultural attractions. When people are looking for something to do, some form of entertainment, some form of learning in many cases, they'll often be considering going to the zoo or the aquarium or the National Gallery, Melbourne Museum, Science Works. All these sort of spaces are ones that compete in a sense. And so us understanding visitation trends in here helps us kind of understand who's having success or where we might be losing share to, what sort of experiences we need to adapt in this space. The indicators we touched on before, so public sentiment of Zoos Victoria, we set really high targets for Zoos Victoria being perceived as an organisation that cares for the well-being of animals, as an organisation which works to save endangered animals in Australia and overseas, an organisation that values environmentally sustainable practices, and an organisation that rescues and rehabilitates wildlife in their habitats. So our target for this is around 80% of the population. On a yearly average, we're hitting that, but we do track if there's any dips in this sort of perceptions. It's a really critical one. As you imagine, with the history of zoos, we're trying to set a new standard and set a tone for what zoos can achieve. So for us, we need to set a high target here and make sure that we are taking the public on that journey and they're seeing this work. The metrics for connecting community with nature are also things that we would include in our annual reports. So our overall visitation, how many of those are members, the average rate of visitation by member, their renewal rates, and then the participation within some of our schools programs are ways that we drive that connection with nature. And you touched on before, Michael, the engagement with socially responsible topics we track as well. So some of these relate specifically to wildlife. You can see the KPIs that we have in there are highlighted, but we also track other things that might be, again, headwinds for our business. So reducing plastic use, mental health, renewable and sustainable energy sources is an interest in things that our audience wants to take, or things that Victorians want to take action on that we can support. We also have specific campaigns, so a lot of them are geared around some of those topics, but some of you might be familiar with programs like Don't Palm Us Off, which was about making sure there was standards for labelling palm oil and using more sustainable alternatives. We also have programs around mobile phone recycling. We've got a more sustainable version of coffee, Coffee for Wildlife. There's a Safe Cat, Safe Wildlife program. All of these campaigns have a conservation cause that we're trying to connect with our audiences and help them understand, and then take action on. So we track the actions that our audience is taking. We track the awareness of those campaigns, and obviously the commercial impacts around those as well. In terms of working for wildlife, again, in our annual report, so we're a very public organisation in terms of what we share, so you can find out a lot of this information yourself, but we're focused on wildlife conservation, so the number of captive bred programs that are releasing animals into the wild. Obviously, we've had some impacts over this period from COVID, where not everything's been able to happen the way we would like. But yeah, we've set very high targets. We have more captive breeding programs within Melbourne Zoo that I think I've heard more than any others in the world. So it's one of the leaders in that space. And yeah, supporting those programs for things like the Victorian grassland earless dragon. You might have seen some publicity for recently, which was a species of lizard they thought was actually extinct. It hadn't been seen in 50 years. So our zoo is part of the groups, connected with the group that has rediscovered those and is now breeding them to develop a sustainable population again. So all of those programs get captured in here.
And this must be one of the very expensive parts of your operation too, from what you were saying earlier.
Yeah, hugely. And you imagine there's not necessarily a commercial return for a lizard that not many people think about on a day-to-day basis. But from a biodiversity perspective, it's important that we are supporting a number of different species in the wild as well. And then, so we touched on this before, but there are a number of our key metrics that relate to our business, but you can see a lot of those report on the volume of visitors coming through. But even within that, not all visitors are equal in terms of their overall value. So in some cases, we need to have an approach where we're prioritising high-value audiences. So there's a number of factors that might make an audience high value. It could be their size, their propensity to visit, or their alignment with our cause. There's also the strategic value of our audiences, which includes things like their lifetime value or their influence on others. So one really good example of that at Zoos Victoria is our education audience. We have a huge team dedicated to recruitment for this group, and also developing experiences for this audience. So there's on-site teams at every property, and then they're supported by the corporate team, which Mel's part of. And she's going to touch on, I guess, the more resource-intensive but worthwhile approach that goes into that audience, and I guess why it's a valuable one for us.
Thanks, Brendan. So education as a market within Zoos Victoria really only makes up around 6% of the total admission, and our teacher members as a component of the membership group are only around about 3%. However, teachers are a really valuable audience for us, and students obviously are a really valuable audience as well. Teachers as a lifetime input and engagement and relationship can make a real difference to our moral purpose, which is a future rich in wildlife. And investing in teachers and their capacity to support students to become more aware of, more knowledgeable of, and more skillful in creating that future for themselves as well is a real investment in our moral purpose. So the challenge that we have in meeting the needs of the education market is A, competition. Most students these days go on an average of 1 excursion per year. So it's a real competition for that market out there. And as you can imagine, as the climate changes and we have more variable temperatures happening, the attraction to go to indoor spaces is a little higher than going to outdoor spaces, which is more of a risk factors. However, we're still doing really well. We see around about 150,000 students per year, and we also see around about 1,000 teachers through our professional development programs as well. Our aim ultimately is to have teachers and students acting for wildlife. Now, teachers don't have in their remit as a teacher to act for wildlife. So what we do is we create all of the value for them in creating a "this is for you" approach, and we give them the things that they need to be able to meet what their outcomes are in terms of curriculum outcomes for students, and actually providing really engaging and rewarding and valuable opportunities for their students so that their students are connected and wanting to learn. So there's a lot of things that we do, and we umbrella all of these things under what we call the Fighting Extinction Schools program. As you can see, Fighting Extinction is Zoos Victoria's brand, and the education program is called Fighting Extinction Schools program. So we don't just do excursions, we do a broad range of digital programs so that we can reach students and teachers across regional and remote Victoria as well. We have an extensive teacher professional development program, which is face-to-face, on-demand and online. We do a showcase every year where schools and students who are excelling in this space come and share their knowledge and their outcomes with each other and celebrate. We have broad range of digital online resources which are available to support teachers in the classroom. We have a very valuable and rewarding youth leadership program, which is a longer course for year 9 and 10 science students. And we have a teacher membership program, which not only gives teachers access to all of the things that a normal member would get, which includes access to all of our zoos and the zoos that are part of ZAR around Australia, but it also gives them access to exclusive content that other teachers wouldn't get access to. In this range of things that we do here, we do have a mix of paid and unpaid opportunities for teachers to engage. And the reason that we do that is it basically supports a model which allows teachers to engage and then us to work on that relationship as the starting point from where they're coming from. So this is the identified customer journey that we are working with at Zoos Victoria for teachers. This is the engagement strategy, and what we do is we aim to take teachers from that bottom rung where they all are right up to the top, and we don't expect them all to get there. So we work really well in the space of making sure that we're using all the marketing tools that we can to so SEO and social media, attending marketing conferences, and being in places where teachers are to make sure that they know that we exist, that they know that we're there for them to make their job easier and their students learning more rewarding. And as they move up that customer journey there, their students are more likely to be acting for wildlife as the relationship with a teacher deepens, their support from us deepens, their confidence in teaching in this space deepens, their capacity to understand all the things that are on offer for them to support them deepens, and we're more likely to have really engaged teachers that are doing wonderful things for wildlife with their students, and a return visitor. And that's one of the most valuable things about this smaller cohort, is that they are a market that we can rely on to return each year if we really have that deep relationship with them. Back to you, Brendan.
Yeah, so I think a good example there, not all audiences have the same commercial value back to us, and to have that lifetime value. Most Victorian school kids have some experience with the zoos through that program. That's a really valuable start for us, even building a relationship later in their lives.
Yes.
So I guess, any questions from your side?
Look, every time I've ever seen a presentation from Zoos Victoria, two things stand out to me. One is the sophistication of the marketing and the challenges in the marketing approaches that you have to have. It always just surprises me. And one thing really stands out. That was one of the saddest sounds that I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah.
Thank you for playing that to give our students listening to this the sound of a species that is now extinct. Is probably something they'll never ever again. Hopefully, they'll never ever again experience that in their lives. So thank you for that. That was quite moving. When you look at all the different sorts of things that you have to measure across your organisation to get an idea of how well you're performing, what are some of the hardest things for you to measure?
It's usually the softer indicators. So obviously, like commercial performance is usually pretty cut and dry, and our finance team have a very clear opinion about whether we're up or down on those things. But yeah, setting targets for things that there's not an industry benchmark for when you're trying to be a leader in a particular space, that can be really tricky. And around conservation, to know what's effective. We're the only zoo in the world that might be operating with particular species, that might be running a particular program. So we have a process of constantly evaluating, I guess, our metrics and how we do feedback on the campaign success. And if indeed we are being successful with it, so we have to constantly change what we're looking at. That's why we have such a broad approach. I guess there are some really clear-cut metrics around commercial things. There are some indicators that are quite consistent, where we are tracking perceptions of the zoo, and even from like a campaign performance, we get down to marketing and they're quite clear. But understanding the headwinds, understanding all those sort of things, those are metrics that may be a little bit trickier for us to use as for forecasting.
Yep. And is it sometimes a challenge within the organisation in terms of where you put your effort and your focus and your resources? Because you have...
Yeah, absolutely. And everything is always laddering up to our outcome around conservation. So our moral purpose is the primary goal, but how we get there is always a debate. And the commercial outcome, being a really strong, thriving business, helps expand the scope. We have more visitors, we have a bigger community to do things with. We've got better commercial partners on board that can help enable more in that conservation space than if we were to just put the dollar straight into that in some cases.
Yep.
But yeah, there's different funding models and different approaches taken depending on what we're doing. And in some cases, we are very lucky to receive grants, government funding that goes directly into our into particular things, whether that's for the zoo or for our conservation work. But yeah, there's always a big debate around where the money's best spent. But ultimately, we're using those indicators to make sure that it is all tracking back to that same outcome.
Yep. I guess the holy grail is when you start to see some kind of model or approach where conservation related activities can be linked to revenue generation, which is sort of that's a bit of an ideal, isn't it? I'm sure there are some areas with that may be about to happen. Thank you very, very much. For the students listening to this, if you think of some of the tools that we've been studying, like the value proposition canvas and the business model canvas, this is a great example of a complex organization with some very, very distinct customer segments that all require a slightly different value proposition, all require different approaches to creating customer relationships, different approaches to channels, different activities and resources, and different sets of partnerships. So it's not often that you will see this range of challenges and customer segments and different requirements with different relationships in one organization. So it's quite a unique opportunity. Once again, thank you very, very much, Brendan and Mel, for taking the time to give us these insights, because it's not something that we get the chance to hear about very often. So thank you very, very much again, and we look forward to extending this relationship yet again. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for inviting us to share.
Great.